Welcome everybody to the Personal Health Summit 2015. Super excited to have an amazing guest with us tonight, Stephen Timms, who's going to be sharing a lot about the art and science of the human body. First of all, thank you so much for investing the time in yourself, in your own health, in your own life, to be here listening to these conversations. We have 30 experts from all over the world bringing messages in the fields of nutrition, science, medicine, exercise, sleep, mindfulness, consciousness, World Health Solutions. It really is an amazing conversation we're having with this personalised health series. So thank you so much for being here. A huge thank you to our major sponsors, Ultimate Human Foundation, who are working tirelessly towards the elimination of chronic pain and disease in the world, and to PH360, who is applying the tangible personalised health insights and epigenetics that can really help us understand more about who we are, what's right for us at this point in time to transition to a state of health, and very specifically in the areas of food and exercise, and climate, our relationships, the way our mind works, our natural talents, amazing insights that can really help you from whatever position you're at in your life to understand more about yourself and allow your body to talk to you through a platform that exists online. So thank you so much for all being here. Super excited. Our intention for this summit is for you to take this information, to be able to apply it in a very tangible way in your life, to be able to help with your transition. So without any further ado, I'd love to introduce Stephen Timms to you guys today. Steve is a sports physiotherapist and a sports scientist. He's from Australia. He may speak a little bit funny like I do, but please enjoy the conversation. He's looked after many amazing people in his career, like the Australian cricket team. He's looked after many state, national and international level athletes in sports like rugby league, in Australian rules football, which Steve may share a little bit about tonight for those that aren't familiar with Australian rules football, tennis, many other sports. And is highly regarded in Brisbane and across Australia as one of the best clinicians that's going around. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining us on the summit. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure, Matt. Thanks for the invite. It's a fantastic initiative. I think this health summit, bringing the best minds of the world together and trying to make a tangible difference, as you mentioned, in the lives of many. So happy to be on board and really excited to have a good chat today.
Beautiful, thanks, Steve. And I'd love to jump in and hear a little bit about you. And we're also always very fascinated in understanding a bit more about our speakers and how they got to this point where they are right now. I know you've worked with thousands of people all across Australia and internationally in helping them navigate through a state of health issues and moving towards a state of health. So can you just share with us a little bit about you and where you've been, how you get to where you get to right now, and what experiences you've enjoyed the most, maybe?
Yeah, sure. It's been a pretty long road, I suppose, in terms of how you get to where you are, and I think all good journeys are a nice long journey. But I think for me personally, I grew up in a small country town in rural Australia, and I moved to the big smoke to do study, obviously, to get out of town and start learning about things that I really were interested in. And I was interested in sport and exercise and health and the human body more globally. So I went and did my an undergraduate degree at a university in Brisbane here, and sport and exercise science, and I learned a lot. I learned about the body and its adaptation to exercise particularly, but also a lot touching the surface around some of the disease states and how important exercise is in improving a lot of those disease states, and more importantly, preventing those disease states. So from there, I was very fortunate. As I mentioned, I was always interested in sport and played sports at a relatively high level locally in Brisbane here, and kind of amalgamated both of those and went down the sports science route there. After my degree, I was lucky enough to work with our national sporting organisation in cricket, and I'm sure some of your North American viewers or listeners aren't really too across the game of cricket, but it's a little bit similar to baseball, but you're standing out in the sun all day, potentially for 5 days in a row. So it's quite a long sport. There are shorter versions at the moment, but I was lucky enough to get a very good role with our national cricket team at a national centre where we had basically trying to foster the next generation of cricketers and elite athletes coming through that. So I worked there and helped out the many different disciplines of sports science and sports medicine and coaching. And then from there, they asked me to do some research. So I went and did a Masters of Applied Science in Research and spent 2 years of my life looking at squatting behaviors and how that affects people's health, believe it or not, and their biomechanics and injury rates. So I was very blessed to be in that kind of situation, working with elite athletes, the best staff in the world in physio and strength and conditioning, psychology, nutrition, and coaching, and a few other things. And it really dawned on me, or impressed upon me, how important and how multidimensional people are. And obviously that's elite sport. We need to make sure that we approach them from every different angle, but I then translate that across to all my patients that I see now. So everyone has a lot of different aspects to who they are as a person, and it would be naive of me to try and treat everyone the same way with only the one kind of very narrow view. From there, I was lucky enough to, I decided to go off and do some more study, and I did a master's of physiotherapy, and that allowed me to become a physiotherapist or a physical therapist here in Australia. So after that, again, similar concepts and similar thought patterns with me, that I wanted to make sure that I could approach every person holistically. I wanted to make sure that we could discuss their problems from every standpoint that I knew something about. And if I didn't know something about it, then I was more than happy to be collaborative with a number of different people and try and make sure that that person was being treated holistically where appropriate. And then from there, I went into a private practice in Brisbane, and as you mentioned, Matt, after that, I've been seeing a number of different people. So obviously elite level athletes in more conventional sports like cricket, swimming, tennis, rugby league you mentioned, as well as Australian rules football, which we will probably touch on a little bit later on, as well as some more interesting sports like taekwondo, and I'm currently training a professional mixed martial artist, which is fun in itself, and providing me with plenty of challenges. But I see many and varied athletes, as well as many and varied people from the general population, and we'll talk about a little bit later on about some of the things that I use to help get a good result for those people. But that's basically me in a nutshell, I suppose.
Beautiful, Steve. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of points that you mentioned there, and that is really about understanding that there's a very holistic approach to the way that we see people. And you being a clinician yourself is really important to the way that you understand working with a multidisciplinary team. So working with psychologists, working with nutritionists, dietitians, working with coaches, and many other people that fit into this holistic health discipline. Is really an important factor I wanted to point out to everyone. We've had some great conversations this week about the importance of looking outside of just one solution or one thing that may exist for someone. And the second is just the way that you approach the clients that you see, or even people in the world for that matter, understanding that we're very everybody's very different and requires a different approach. As you talk about, you're working with professional and semi-professional athletes that all have very different circumstances, all probably very different diets. All train different amounts each day, and all have different injuries that show up. And it's really an important point to understand. To kick off, this is a personalised health summit that we're talking about here, and really important for people to understand the principles that everybody's very, very different. And it's great to hear from a practitioner's point of view how someone would approach that, and how if you walked in to see someone, how that actually works from your eyes. Because often we don't understand this. We sort of rock up not knowing what to expect if we're in a state of ill health or disease. And so I'd love just to, I don't know, you've got a very extensive background in strength and conditioning, in movement sciences, in exercise science. We've had a couple of conversations so far this summit about exercise and about revolutionising the way we think about exercise and health. And I know in Australia you're one of the leaders in a conversation about personalised movement. And we talk about, we've talked a lot about personalized health, which encompasses a lot of things like, foods, and we talked about personalized nutrition so far. We're talking about personalized movement now. Can you talk us a little bit through what's the concept of personalized movement? What does that mean, and how does this apply to some of the athletes you've seen, or some of the clients you've seen, or even some of the ways that any of us sitting here listening at home right now can apply those principles to what we might do with the way that we move in our lives?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a fantastic point to illustrate, is that firstly, we are all unique. Okay, we're all very different bodies. To, like I mentioned before, to try and approach many very different problems with the same solution isn't going to work. to try and give you the same exercises to person X, Y, and Z, despite them all being very different people in different stages of their life, like you mentioned, young, old, fit, unfit, well or unwell, to give them all the same thing would be arguably reckless on my behalf to give them all the same thing. So that's obviously the first point that I wanted to illustrate. Secondly, different body types, I think we'll touch on this a little bit shortly, or different demands that people put themselves through are also very important. So if I've got, say, for example, I mentioned before, my mixed martial artist, if I try and give him the same exercises as I do for my 60-year-old lady who wants to get back to exercise after a hip replacement, it's just completely incompatible. So I wanted to make sure that obviously I address the person that's sitting in front of me, their demands, not only from a physical standpoint, but more holistically, like we mentioned, but specifically from a physical standpoint, what are they trying to get back to? Where have they been? And what other more personal factors are going to change the way that I approach that? So I touched a little bit on body types there. So the best way to describe this, I suppose, is that, again, everyone's different, but everyone has general tendencies in terms of their bodies. So we have different body types, should I say. So we have people who tend to be tall and lean, for example. We have the more shorter and rounder. We have people with large amounts of muscle bulk, less amounts of muscle bulk. So again, their abilities, their physical traits, their physical tendencies are all going to be very different person to person. So if I have someone sitting in front of me that is quite tall and lean, it'll be inappropriate for me to try and load them up with lots and lots and lots of weights training in order to get them back to what they need to do. Okay, and if I have someone who is, say, shorter and rounder carrying excess weight, for me to try and tell them to run 10 kilometers every day is, again, arguably not going to be the best thing for their body, regardless of whether they're fit or not. So I think that's probably one of the first things that I want to address is obviously, who are they, where have they come from, and where are they going? And then we start delving down into the more personal layers of what's the body that is in front of me.
Beautiful. Thanks, Steve, for that. And would you mind just sharing a little bit more about this concept with us? Because it really is fascinating. In some some traditions like Ayurvedic medicines and Chinese medicines, we talk about the constitution of the person. From a Western point of view, we talk about anthropometry and body types. Feel free to use whichever language you like that suits. But if you could just share with us a little bit about that, about how you shared about three general groups of people maybe around a circle, or however that looks, as to what gives you an understanding about the sort of people that or this sort of exercise or movement that these sort of people have. And it really is important. Like if you're listening in right now, as Steve describes you can sort of see where you might fit on the curve, or see where you might fit in between sort of two groups that he describes, or something like that. And you may even be able to get a good understanding maybe from Steve as to the best exercise or the best sort of movement that suits you. Because it really is such an important thing to understand that not everybody's built to run marathons, not everybody's built for strength training, not everybody's built to do 5 mile or 10 mile runs every day. Everybody's very, very different, but there is a lot of people that are built for all those specific things. So Steve, if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit on that and that whole concept, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, quite right. I think you hit the nail on the head that obviously people are going to be not suited for certain sports, and most certainly that's definitely the challenge when you have someone walking in who wants to run a marathon who arguably isn't built for it. But I suppose that's a chat for another time, how to change their perception of things. But for the most part, like you said, there's going to be certain physical traits, and the best way I suppose I can explain it is obviously the most familiar in my perspective is sporting background. So you can, if you have a look, you can start to see that there are going to be certain sports are going to attract a natural body type, and it's an interesting question whether they self-select or whether or not they've just become an elite athlete because of these genetic predispositions or their physical traits. So you think of, say, like a dancer, for example, they're going to be quite slight and light of build, for example. They're going to be quick on their feet. They're going to be quite graceful. They're going to tend to be longer and leaner in stature, and they're going to be really well suited for that. Whereas you see someone in a contact sport is going to be much more heavily built. They're going to be less inclined to do longer distance running type activities, but they're going to be able to absorb physical contact quite well, for example, and be predisposed again to be able to put on lots of muscle, put on lots of weight, and be quite happy doing that. And then further up, you see people more on the lines of a sprinter, for example, as well. They're going to be much much more muscle bulk, but lean muscle in particular. They're going to be very fast at what they do, very agile, but they won't be interested in trying to run 10 miles, as you mentioned. So you're going to have those three relatively different body types. So are we okay to delve in a bit more specific in terms of names and things?
Feel free, Steve. This is great.
Cool.
As long as just want to make sure it can really apply to those that are listening at home. We've probably got people that may be here who are elite athletes that are listening in right now. Maybe you're at home listening in, and you're maybe 60 plus years old with suffering from pain and disease. So if you can, can include that conversation from everybody who's listening right now, watching this replay, that would be really, really amazing. Thank you. Okay, so in essence, there are three general body types. So we have an ectomorph, your tall and lean type dancer people. We have our mesomorph, which is a more muscular build. And then we have our endomorph, which is going to be typically higher body mass type people. So they're going to be, again, those contact sport people, rugby league or gridiron for those people in North America. They're the three general types, okay? And obviously there's blends of those types that have predisposition to certain activities. So if you're an elite athlete at home, for example, and you're, say you're tall and lean and you're trying to play a contact sport, you're already at a disadvantage. But if you're tall and lean and trying to run marathons, you're going to be at an advantage compared to, say, your endomorph, who is, the larger people. As you age, I suppose it becomes a little less important in terms of being able to be an elite at something, but it can still most certainly apply to the way that you approach exercise. And again, understanding what body type that you are may also then make you understand which types of activity you're going to be drawn to and be really interested in engaging with, as opposed to it being a chore and you're less likely to do it, or arguably don't do it at all. So that's one of the biggest things that I want to hit home with people who are listening, is that exercise, your body wants to move. It loves activity. I would suggest anyone do any activity that you enjoy, that doesn't cause you harm, and then go from there, basically. Beautiful, Steve. Thanks. And could you just share a little bit more about? I know you've said that really well in a way for elite athletes, which is great. What about the taller, thinner people that aren't so don't have tendencies towards sports so much? What sort of activities more so would they be looking towards? If it's something that even if they're not very active right now, or they want to be more active but aren't sure where to start.
Yeah, sure. I suppose it starts to blend now a bit more towards my physical therapy role as opposed to my purely exercise role. But for someone who's tall and lean, who hasn't got a good exercise background, I'll be leaning towards just going straight to something like just long, slow walks. Particularly for those people, they'll be engaged with that. Or things like yoga or stretching, or something that's going to be moving their joints and their bodies. Typically, these people, like I said before, are usually light of frame, so that strength training activities typically aren't going to be the best thing to jump straight off the couch into. You're probably going to do yourself a disservice and your body a disservice by trying to do that. So I'd be doing things that are relatively low impact, like swimming, long walks, those type of activities that aren't necessarily going to impact upon joints, and particularly the spinal column for those types of bodies. And again, usually I find that they want to be quite intellectual with their activities, so it may have a particular meaning for them. So that's why I mentioned yoga or Tai Chi or something along those lines, where they can really embrace the theory behind the exercise, not just the physicality of it.
Yeah, so, beautiful. No, that's exactly what we're looking for. Thank you. And if you just went and shared just a little bit more around that as well, so coming around the next type you talked about, just in a bit more detail, again, from an athletic point of view, but also from the general point of view for someone maybe in their 40s, 50s, and maybe someone in their 65 plus that might be listening in today. What sort of activities are really good for them? And maybe it's the less, as you say, the people who are taller and slimmer, maybe more beneficial for them to be doing longer, more endurance style things, some things that are incorporating their brain a bit more. What about for the people who maybe have more muscle bulk naturally, that maybe are a little bit shorter, a little bit stockier? What sort of things might they be considering as really good exercises for them?
Yeah, cool. Those types of activities on your younger, more active scale are going to really enjoy things like team sports. they're particularly, I find they're particularly competitive. They really like to be engaged in a team sport and really worried about the goal, be very physical. They like to be very dynamic, very agile, almost like a cat. So think of it like a cat, I suppose. They want to do things like, the footballs, the soccers, tennis, those kind of hand-eye coordination, very rapid, quick sports. As you move a little bit more towards you're getting a little bit more sedentary or a little bit more elderly, you can still do those things, but probably just not hanging out with people in your teens, I suppose. You want to then also make sure that you can do things that are going to be good for your body, like some form of resistance training. So whether that's in your gym or doing body pump classes or something that has some form of weights training behind it, their body will typically enjoy. They also like to be not only dynamic by their physicality, but also their brain. So they really like to be engaged in many very different activities. It would arguably drive you people at home who have this body type to go out and do the same activity week in, week out for months. You won't do it. You won't comply, which is fine. Just find activities that you're going to be doing it with people, make it competitive. From a clinician standpoint, I know that when I'm rehabbing these people, I try and make everything a game. So I'll try and say, these are the normal population. This is what they kind of get. I'm expecting you to maybe do a little bit less just to kind of get their competitive juices going. And then they'll try and come back the next week and tell me how impressive they were and better than what the normal is. So it works well into my hands as a clinician in that sense. But I want to make sure that the next week when I see them, that we change it again. Otherwise, they're going to be less inclined to go and, well, I've already beaten the normal population. Why do I want to go back and do some more? I'm not too fussed whether or not it helps me or not. I want to keep playing this game of being better and beating people or want to get back to my sport and things like that. So for that kind of very muscular build, something that's going to be very dynamic, often team-orientated or competition-based, will be very good for those people. And that can be, lawn bowls. If you're 65, 70, 80, 85, 90, you can still be getting out there, being competitive and getting moving.
Beautiful. Thanks, Steve, for clarifying that. And I think you've covered a pretty good range from young to old there. Yeah. Coming around to the third, I guess, group of people you described there, who may be a little bit wider in their bone structure and a little bit wider around hips and waists. And we talk, and just to clarify here, I know that we talk a lot about the body shapes and body types. It's based on the bone structure, right? It's not.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But it's actually how wide your bones are, or how wide you are around your chest or around your hips.
Yeah, very specifically. Yeah, exactly.
So for those that have larger bones, that have wider hips or bigger chests and bigger shoulders, what sort of things we'll be looking at again from sort of that? I like how you just talked us through from a younger age to an elderly age. What sort of things, activity-wise, might be suitable for that sort of type, that sort of structure and stature? Sure.
Thanks for clearing that up, Matt. I'm not trying to tell people at home that just because you're wider, then you're going to be doing this and that's going to apply to you. As you mentioned, anthropometry has been around for a long time. There are a lot of things, particularly jaw structure, cheekbone structure, chest structure, joint structure, length of fingers, etc. There's a lot of things that go into this. So thank you for clarifying that. In terms of those people who have the wider hips, the wider shoulders, generally the larger body types, they obviously have a great propensity to put on like muscle mass particularly, and can deal quite well with heavy loads. So they're going to be really engaged in their strength training, particularly. They can go either way in terms of being quite like a boxing activity. So they really enjoy a lot of forceful activities and again, some competition, but again, probably leaning towards more of the contact type sports where they absorb forces or they powerfully push something. So you think about like a shot putter, for example. They're a classic of what I'm talking about. They have larger bodies. They have the ability to push large weights very quickly, very far, essentially. So they're the kind of body types that I'm talking about here. So you'll often see those people in the gyms. They're squatting heavy weights. They're pushing around quite heavy weights, and are going to be good for those kind of contact sports. They're in your younger periods. In terms of their cardiovascular, they need a lot of cardiovascular work just like everyone else does. But if you think about someone who's 280 pounds or 120 kilos trying to run 10, 15 miles, it's going to be very, very difficult for their joints and spines, knees, even ankles and feet, to be able to absorb that load repetitively. So I'd again, if I was going to lean towards some form of cardiovascular training for them, it would be, again, toward the low impact, lots of swimming, lots of upper limb cardiovascular stuff, rowing, those type of things. Oh yeah, a row is also a very good example of what they're very good at. So again, power activities is what they're going to be going for. As you age, again, making sure that you can still most certainly engage in some form of resistance training. But I think from my perspective, making sure that you're really looking after your limbs and your joints in particular by trying to keep away from the longer, lower repetitive type activities, which will increase your risk of, say, things like osteoarthritis.
Beautiful. Awesome, Steve. Thank you for walking us through that. It's a really clear representation. And I know for those listening in, there was a lot of information that was covered there. So thank you, Steve, for talking us through that. And I hope that everybody that's at home right now can understand a bit more maybe where they're sitting towards one of those categories or between one of those categories, and have some sort of understanding about personalised movement, personalised exercise. It's going to be very, very helpful and very appropriate for you as you sit here. And again, this is a summit all about personalised health. And I really appreciate the insight you bring here, Steve, as to the conversation about personalised movement, because that is a very, very common question that we get from so many different people about, what should I do? What sort of exercise do I do? Where do I start? How do I transition? The things I used to love when I was younger that now I don't. There's a lot of those things that we come up against all the time. So thanks for sharing that whole concept about personalised movement. I just want to visit the whole personalisation concept a little bit further, if we can. And just going into I guess where we have previously in the past and arguably still do a lot in most places, think about exercise as something that we just do to lose fat or to build muscle or to tone up. And I know that you're pioneering a lot of the things in Australia in this field at the moment. Can you share with us a little bit more about what's behind the scenes, about what we're starting to realise or what we're starting to be aware of, what we're starting to consider when we look at prescribing an exercise or exercise prescription for people? This the personalised movements we've talked about, which sort of movements and exercises are more appropriate for people. Can you talk to us a bit more about what's actually behind that, if that's appropriate?
So again, I want to make sure everyone's aware that all forms of exercise are going to be arguably better than none. That's one of the biggest things, I think, particularly given the obesity epidemic and metabolic syndromes that are most likely going to continue to crop up over the next probably 10 to 15 years. It's really important that we do some form of exercise. So if you're confused or unaware, something will be better than nothing, in often the case. In terms of being a little bit more specific or working behind the scenes, I suppose, I've worked heavily with yourself in terms of the PH360 program, which is an unbelievable program in terms of being able to identify specifically what exercises for you are going to be worthwhile and are up your alley. Going, obviously taking into account not only body types but a number of other things. And then moving forward into other things like for different sporting populations, what is appropriate for different people. So I think working behind the scenes, some of the things that I want to be mindful of for people is obviously the state of their age or their health currently, and I want to be looking at other things around that. So how does their nutrition affect their health? And then is it their nutrition that's stopping them to being able to, is that their barrier to exercise? Is it their mental state? Are they stressed at work? Are there other factors at play that are stopping them to, or are there barriers to exercise again? Is it a previous experience in terms of they played a sport as a kid that wasn't appropriate for them or they didn't enjoy, and then that's their hang up? Or do they, as simple as, do they have a current injury and what's stopping them from getting back? So from a very personal perspective, those are the things that I'll be addressing in terms of working through an individual's problem to get them back on track. Does that answer your question?
I think it does, and I just wanted to see if you could delve a little bit more into as well, like from an exercise point of view. I know that you're looking a lot behind just the cardio, behind the toning side of things, and looking into the way that the nerves might move in the body with certain exercises and certain movements for some people, the way that the lymphatic system might flow in a different way. looking at the way that joints might move, or someone's predisposition having more stiffness in their spine in various parts. There's a lot of information that goes behind these new paradigms that exist in personalised health and personalised movement. Just wondering if you could share a little bit about that, maybe even a little bit about the differences between the three types again, or just how you're actually looking at that these days, and maybe even if you have some information about likeliness or likelihood of diseases or illnesses or injuries, or anything like that, just for us to get more of an understanding about how you as an amazing sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist and clinician can really harness the concepts of personalised health and make such a huge difference in so many people's lives by helping understand who they are and what's right for them at this point in time.
Yeah, I think I might use an example with my predominant sport in which I look after, which is Australian rules football. It's for those people who don't know it, it's essentially it's a very heavily based running sport, but a full contact sport where you can deliver the ball between two ends of a field by hand or by foot, essentially. These guys are supreme athletes. They've got sprint times on par with some of the best sprinters in the world. They can run 22 kilometers in a couple of hours at high repetitive sprints. They can run all day. They can bench press, double their body weight. They are incredible specimens. They're very, very fit people. But in saying that, again, they still fall into the those natural three body types. There's different positions for different bodies. So we have typically, similar to a basketballer in the start, we have the ball goes up in the air, and they're usually quite tall people. We're talking in excess of 2 meters, or 6'9" or 6'10", quite tall people who are usually very well built, and that's leaning towards those bigger body frames that I talked about before. These people are typically going to have a lot of soft tissue injuries, particularly around their feet. A lot of problems with tendons, so they'll have a lot of tendinopathies or tendinitises. And so for me as a sports physiotherapist and a strength and conditioning coach, for me to prescribe certain types of exercise, so if I told them to go and do lots and lots and lots of running, that will break them. So the last thing I need to do in season is go and tell one of my key players to do a certain type of exercise and break him. So what I'll do is then do his conditioning differently to some of the other players. I'll drag him out away from teams when I need to, particularly if he's returning from injury, and I'll exercise him differently to the others. In saying that as well, I'll treat him very differently. So I'll treat necessarily more around some of the musculotendinous junctions around, say, knees and ankles, and as well as particularly through the hips and lumbar spine. And I'll spend a lot of my time conditioning through there, release work through there, and ensuring that the biomechanics and the attenuation of forces are really sound through that region. Because for him, that's going to be a problem for him moving forward, particularly in a running sport. Then I can, almost on the opposite end of the scale, I'll have a look at the smaller guys who are basically similar to a center in soccer, who basically run all day. They're the guys who are almost the playmakers. They run, they do lots of sprinting, they do lots of tackling. These guys are usually a blend of, say, the mesomorph or the muscular components and the lean. So they're a bit of a mix, a hybrid. So they take the best of the muscle, and they also take the best of the long and lean. So they can run all day, but they're extremely agile, and they can also have the propensity to put on a lot of lean muscle. But again, I'll treat them very differently. They're going to have more problems with, say, fascial problems or neural problems specifically from the lumbar spine. So in a running sport, I'll make sure that'll be probably one of my first port of calls. I want to make sure their lumbar spine or their lower back, for those people at home, I want to make sure that that's really working well. I want to make sure that the fascial tightness around their knee, particularly their kneecap, is working really well. And I want to make sure there's no problems with the way that their nerves slide when they run. Often this will be a precursor to, say, things like hamstring tears or calf tears. I know that if they're complaining of tightness, I'm not going to get them to do sprints or anything that heavily taxes that neural system to slide, because they're going to have an increased risk of having a muscle tear, for example. And then moving around again to some of the shorter, the guys with the bigger bone structures. So these are the guys who are big power forwards. They don't have to do as much running, but they have to do it when they do run. They have to be very quick. They have to take on usually a fair bit of contact when they do it, and they have to make sure that they they can do their job. They don't have to do it all day, but when they do it, they do it well. So these guys, again, I'll treat very differently. They're, without delving too much into it, they're going to have more problems around their organs. So believe it or not, when they have an injury, I'm going to talk to them more about their nutrition and making sure that they're not prone to having a lot of inflammatory processes that are happening in their body that tend to want to perpetuate in this type of body. So I'll most certainly keep them away from things like sugars, simple sugars, should I say. I want to make sure that they're not eating too many red meats or things that are very hard to digest. And I want to make sure that they're having more things that are easy for them to digest. So things like juices, et cetera, to help break down or change any inflammatory processes that may be happening through their stomach that may then go systemically through their body. So that's a bit of an insight. I'll be less hands-on with these guys, and I'll be focusing on resting them as opposed to pushing them with some of the other body types as a general snapshot. So hopefully that answers your question. And we can go again towards different, and again, I suppose the same thing applies to everyday people. So if you have, people in the gym, for example, who are, the larger body structures, the same thing can be said for them. You're going to have problems potentially with your feet. So making sure that you have an adequate diet in place will really, help you lose weight, take the load off your feet, very, very straightforward. But you're not perpetuating that systemic inflammation that may be running through your body. So oftentimes it may not be damage necessarily to that joint anymore. It could be the inflammation around that joint that's causing you your pain and discomfort. That is now your barrier to getting back to exercise. For some of the other people, say in general practice, who are again taller and leaner, they want to make sure that they have the details. I'm much more inclined to make sure I give them 6 weeks in advance of what they need to do and make sure we go through it systematically so I know that they'll be compliant. Often these people, if they understand why they're doing things, they're going to be much more compliant. So I want to make sure that they're doing their thing and make sure that they can they can empower themselves, I suppose, a little bit more than other body types. Does that make a little bit of sense? I know I've talked about sports and I've talked about non-sports, but I just wanted to make sure that you're still following there, Matt.
That's great, Steve. I'm certainly following, and there's a lot of information you just covered there. And I want to just make sure, just to summarise all the stuff that Steve talked about here. There's a lot of content that's in there, and the message here is about personalised health. The message here is about understanding that each person is actually quite different. We all have different genes. We all have different environments. We have different circumstances. We have different amounts of muscle. We have different amount of fat. We have different size bones. We're all very, very different. And of course, that means that the way that we move and then the way that we naturally move is very different for each person. And whether you're an elite athlete or someone who's in the 60s sitting at home, the same concepts apply, is that understanding what's the best for your body at this point in time so that you can be moving and be happy and healthy. And we've talked quite a lot this summit with a number of speakers about the importance of movement and about the importance of exercise and about the fact that it's our environment and lifestyle that can actually influence us in a very, very powerful way. And Steve, I'd love just to switch gears. I really appreciate your perspective today from a clinician's point of view. And it's great to hear how a mind of a clinician works. And again, one of the more experienced clinicians in Australia that has elite athletes and many, many people come to see you for treatments. It's great to be able to see what goes through your mind and what goes through your brain when you have these people in front of you and you're treating. Often those listening right now, we don't really know what goes through a therapist's mind if you go to see someone, or if we were thinking about it, it's something you don't know. It's really sometimes quite daunting to be able to even take the first step to see someone, to get assistance, sort of pop your hand up and say, hey, I'd like someone to help kickstart my own healing mechanism, please. I'd love just to transition in towards just talking a little bit more about that concept of personalized health and epigenetics as we talk, and maybe moving a little bit away from the clinician side of things and more into the conceptual side of things. So from your understanding about how all these things interplay and cause this dynamic interaction that is the human body, can you give us just a bit of understanding from your view about epigenetics, about the things that we should be considering? And again, for us listening here at home right now, or wondering where's the next step for me. Maybe I'm in a stressful relationship. Maybe I'm experiencing stress at work. Maybe I'm in an environment that's not great for me. maybe I'm not doing much exercise, or I want to be doing a lot of exercise, but I just can't make myself do it. I've tried and failed. Maybe I've done dieting and lost weight and then put it back on again. This is the sort of stuff that we're regularly experiencing in life. And can you share a little bit about this whole concept of epigenetics with us, and what that means for us, and how this is going to be helping empower us from the point in time where we are right now?
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question, actually. It's a very good point. It's epigenetics, obviously, the way I think it, I conceptualize it, I suppose, is that it's the things outside our basic genetic makeup that'll most certainly have an effect on how we as a person are, or our end result, basically. So these are the things that you touched on before, things like exercise, diet, even things like stress, your work, where you live, the time of year, the time of day, and a number of very, very different things, many and varied things. So I think taking a lot of those things into account, from my perspective, I mentioned it right at the top of the show, is that that you have to take in a holistic point of view, and you have to look at all these different things that affect the whole person. Okay, so exercise is only one of those epigenetic factors that can affect who you are. You may have a propensity or the genes to be kind of tall and lean, but if you don't, if you eat terribly, you're stressed in a high stressful job, and you don't exercise, so on and so forth, or you're in a terrible climate for you, you may no longer be tall and skinny. You'll always have that predisposition, but your epigenetics will have a massive effect on the person looking back in the mirror at you at the moment. And the converse of that is true. You may have the genes to be quite round and naturally carry more weight, but if you're eating well, you're in a good state mentally, you're exercising well, you're happy with your relationships at home and at work, you're in a good environment, so on and so forth, your body and your even your brain, your personality will most certainly change. So and it'll change for everyone depending on which time of year and et cetera, all these factors. So from my perspective, as I mentioned before, it's really important that we ask these questions, even of yourself. Am I in a job at the moment that's restricting my ability to have good relationships? What kind of effect is that having on my health? Am I bringing my stress home to my family, and that's putting a strain on my family? Or is it making me go towards the junk food because I'm stressed? Or is it not making me want to exercise because I don't want to have to think about that now, I've got too much work to do, so on and so forth? Is the climate where I'm at, is it too cold, or is it too hot? Is it whatever the case may be? So I think at least understanding there's many things at play here, and understanding that often a lot of these things are a choice. It's just you have to be aware of what the choice is, and aware that these factors are out there, essentially. So addressing those things are going to be pretty important.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that with us, Steve. And that awareness, as you say, is one of the first steps. In fact, the first step.
The first step, yeah.
To anything, because without knowing where you are right now, without knowing who you are or what's right for you, you're really in a confused space. And this is where we find a lot of this all over the world, that people just don't know where to start. People have tried lots of things and failed or not been successful. And I know this is probably the first conversation we've had about PH360 maybe on this summit series, but I'd love for you just to go into that a little bit more, because PH360 is our major sponsor for the summit. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about these concepts from you, Steve. I know that you're a PH360 accredited coach that practices in Australia. There's a link that we can get up. You can go to visit onlinehealthsummit.com/PH360, onlinehealthsummit.com/PH360 to find out some more information about it. If you're interested too, you can leave a message if you actually want to work with Steve. We're going to be taking some live questions very, very soon with Steve. If you want to interact and engage, please pop your questions in the comments. I know we've got a heap of comments and questions coming through already just from this conversation. People are very interested in these topics and understanding more about who they are and how to find that out. So, Steve, would you mind just sharing a little bit with us about PH360 and what it is, and how you use it, or how this helps people, probably more so, let's say from a clinical point of view, but more so from a way that how this can actually help people navigate from their place of health, or their state of illness or disease, whatever may exist, through to a place of health and happiness.
Sure. I think from a clinician's standpoint, if it's someone with even a standard musculoskeletal problem, they come in with a sore knee, for example, there are still going to be a lot of factors that are going to influence their knee health or their health or the return to health. It becomes a lot more difficult as a clinician when you have someone who comes to you with knee pain, back pain, stressed, they've got that terrible diet, they're overweight, they're not in a good relationship, they don't like their work, etc., etc. And they're at a loss as to what they can do or what they can help or how they can help themselves. I think as a clinician, that's where PH360 for me has been so amazing. And you're quite right, Matt. We're the first and only so far clinic in Australia to be able to offer PH360 to our clients. And it's been absolutely revolutionary from my point of view in the sense that, like you said, awareness is the first step. And until PH360, and I've learned a lot of this stuff over the last number of years, until I was aware of it, it was just oblivious to me. There was no way of me being able to incorporate this into sessions, or at the very least educate my clients and patients about this. And that's where PH360 is so fantastic. It enables you to learn at your own pace, as well as with the hand of a coach, like you mentioned. So you can go through each one of these factors that affect you and why they may affect you. So, how will your diet help you? I mentioned before about particular body types may be having a predisposition to inflammation, for example. So PH360 will be able to tell you and run you through a way to reduce that inflammation. That may then be able to improve your ability to exercise, or at least feel well and reduce your pain state. And then you can go on and change other things in your life. It may also give you an insight as to the way that your brain works and why you think the way that you think, why you don't like this or this person, or why you should be hanging out with more people like this, and you should engage yourself in a certain way, physically, mentally, emotionally, from a nutritional standpoint, etc. So I think it definitely gives you the answers to a lot of these questions that we've been asking today. What food is going to be good for you? What exercise is going to be good for you? What job is good for you? What environment is going to be good for you? So I think from my standpoint, it takes a lot of the guesswork away from that. And it also gives the power to my client to be able to be, or my patient to be, these are the answers, and let's make sure we can work through them together to be able to put you back on the path to full health or optimal health.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. Much appreciated, and does give us more of an insight into PH360. Is this something that people need to see you for a session, or need to see a practitioner to understand PH360, or is this something that everybody can use themselves? And if so, what sort of advice would you have for people to start on that journey?
Most certainly. I think that's the great thing about PH360 is that you can do it yourself online. And I've treated people, even my parents who live many thousands of miles away from me, being able to put them onto PH360, and they've been using it themselves. I use it myself. My whole house uses it. It's something that you can do yourself if you want to. For some people, it may be a little bit too much, and then that's where someone like myself would come in, like a personalized health coach, which will run you through these things and give you a little bit more insights or more tangible ways in which you can apply this to your life. Or if you're having any difficulties, then this a personalized health coach would be the way to approach that. I think from my experience, those people who've come to see a personalized health coach often get a bit of a head start on those people who don't, only because there's a lot of information to take in, and unless you know a fair bit about each one of the things, it can be a little bit daunting, I suppose. So I want to make sure that people are aware that there's a lot of quality information there, but don't get over the top with it. Don't be too scared by it. It should be an exciting adventure, I suppose. That's the way I embraced it when I first started using it, and still using it to this day, and still find it quite exciting from time to time that I don't know how this thing knows me and how it can improve my health so much. But it's phenomenal.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Stephen. It is certainly. Or can you actually even talk us through? I know that there's a lot more about the 3 different types that you haven't shared so far about this, and maybe if you can go into that a little bit more about even which groups, if you sit in this area, which ones may actually even want to have someone to help them with this from a coaching point of view, like yourself. and which ones might be really comfortable to be able to use it themselves. And really just understanding that pH360 is more about it's able to understand which genes you have switched on and off at any particular point in time, and be able to help you navigate in very simple terms the sorts of foods and exercises and environments and climates and friends and talents that are very good for you. So the concept itself is very simple. It's very easy to navigate. However, there's a lot of information in there, and some people love information. Give me the information. And other people find it a little bit overwhelming. So could you maybe, for those who are listening at home right now who might be interested to find out more about it, maybe some of those who may be more suited towards having a coach that can either help inspire them or motivate them, or maybe some that would prefer just to have the information and to jump straight in themselves?
Yeah, sure. So body types like myself, so I'm again that blend of the tall and lean and part muscular. We're typically going to be relatively independent. You run us through a session, tell us the ins and outs, and we'll be like, thanks, I've got all I need. I'll see you in 6 weeks, or see you in 6 months, or may never see you again, and may not need to. They're very self-reliant, and be able to go away, analytically understand all the information there. Whereas some of the other people, say that the more muscly built people are going to be a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more difficult staying on task potentially, and so may need to come in and see someone a little bit more regularly just to make sure they're on task. Theirs will be less about food and exercise because they are so naturally lean, but there's plenty of other things that they can most certainly see a coach about. The people that I find have the most benefit from a health coach will most certainly be the endomorph range. So those people with the wider cheeks and larger jaws, the wider shoulders and hips, they're the people that we want to make sure that are regularly checking in, only because they find it difficult to change, firstly, and I don't mean that in a bad way. They're extremely reliant, extremely loyal people, but they find new things relatively difficult to bring into their life. So you really want to work heavily with someone in that sense to be like, here are the perceived problems that they may have, and here are potential solutions that we can run through. And often after those sessions, they find it much more easy to go forward after that. So in saying that, it is very, very easy to understand. I don't mean to portray it in a bad light. There's lots of great information there. I think for some people, they may be like, it's a bit of a change all too much if they did it on their own. By all means, get with a personalized health coach, and they'll make sure that it's very nice and simple, very tangible in the way that you can approach that to your life.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. And again, we'd encourage you guys to go and check out onlinehealthsummit.com/ph360. The links are there, and if you're in this live, otherwise the replay onlinehealthsummit.com/ph360. Please go and check it out. It's absolutely amazing, the information that's there for you right now. It really is helping you navigate through everything in terms of personalized health. It brings all these conversations from all the different angles, all the different epigenetics that we've spoken about, all Summit series, together in a very tangible way that you can navigate. And as Steve said, that some people are going to need some extra assistance. Maybe that's just doing it with friends or with family, but they may need some support that's there. And of course, if you want to engage with Steve, is there a link where we can find you? I know that you're actually still a very practicing clinician, hands-on, and still helping lots of people. Is there ways that we can find out more about you and what you're up to, or even to talk about some pH360 conversations with you?
Yeah, for sure. There's obviously we have our clinic website to find a little bit more about myself, and that's we can put that up later. But that's www.elitebodymanagement.com, and that's in Australia. That's the practice I work at, Elite Body Management. And then obviously there's other places like LinkedIn and Matt. We can put some other links up afterwards about the pH360 stuff. So.
Cool. Thank you, Steve. And we're just going to transition to a couple of questions here. We've had heaps and heaps of comments and questions coming through the whole way through this conversation. There's a lot of content that Steve's covered. So again, please make sure you go and subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can get the free replays for all the sessions from all the world-class speakers that have been here for this series. And please take advantage of that. Please share this with your family and friends so they can too. If you need to listen to a lot of stuff that Steve has said, again, there's a lot of content, I know. So we've got Zena says here, Steve, I hear the national guidelines recommend 30 to 60 minutes of aerobic activity and some bone and muscle strengthening exercises a few times a week. So does this idea of personalised movement mean that there's not an ideal recommendation for everyone and maybe not for me? I know you have covered some of this, but just to put that in a very clear context again for Zena.
Like I said, it was Zena, wasn't it? So Zena, the most important thing is, and we have to come from a standpoint that is for very much a blanket approach, okay? So, and I'm not sure if you touched on it before, Matt, but the way that we approach particularly Western medicine currently is that if it works for, say, 85% of people, then let's do it, or 60% of people even sometimes. Let's just globally apply that to everyone. As I mentioned, if you're 65, you have osteoarthritic knees, and you're carrying a little bit of weight, if you went out and did 60 minutes of aerobic exercise, even if it was walking, your knees would be shot. You'd have a lot of problems with your knees. You'd be a lot of pain. You're very much less likely to go and do that 3 times a week. There are plenty of other types of activities that you can do, but I think the biggest thing we want to walk away from this is exercises for everyone is great, but more importantly, you have to be a little bit more smarter about the way that you approach things. That you don't have to do the same kind of blanket mold for every type of exercise or for every person, if that makes sense. So by all means, yes, there are some national, and it's different again here in Australia, but there are some national guidelines around what types of exercise, which are great for the general public. But if you're trying to be a little bit more specific for you and your body, then that may not necessarily apply to you as much.
Beautiful. Thanks for answering that question there, Steve. And Zena, I'm pretty sure that covered that, and you've certainly covered that in quite a lot of depth, I think, this call, Steve, so thank you. Anila says, Steve, your background is insane. Do you ever stop learning? Annette says, what determines my body type? Can I change it through exercise? Great question, Annette.
Very good question. So your body type is, like we mentioned before, anthropometry. It's to do with the bone structure specifically, okay? These are developed relatively early on in your embryological state, so as you're developing as a baby and moving forward, and it stems from your parents' genetics, essentially. So yes, you can change part of it, but you're not going to be able to go from one day being like let's just say a long distance runner to a sumo overnight, for example. There's only a certain amount of scope that we can change, and a certain amount of ability for us to change over time. Doesn't mean you can't change, but it would be inappropriate to think one day I'm going to be a triathlete and then go towards being an Olympic lifter, for example.
Excellent, thanks, Steve. And it really is leads into the next question as well, where we've got this from Manila who asks, Steve, when you describe the exercises appropriate for the long and lean body, you mentioned the activities that are good for their body, but also that they'll be more engaged in these activities. What determines how engaged we are in the exercise that we do? That's a really great question, Noah. That
is a fantastic question, actually. Depending, again, different body types, there's a correlation between how brain works, in particular behavioral patterns. So the taller, leaner people in particular will be relatively intellectual. They want to make sure that they're engaged. They're very analytical, like, you know, accountant type people. They're good with numbers. They want to make sure that they understand the reps and sets, relatively meticulous, and they want to come from a intellectual standpoint. So they want to understand the exercise, why they're doing it, particular reps and set ranges, times, intensities, heart rates, etc. They're the kind of people with lots of information. They love it. Whereas someone with the more thick-set bones, they want to feel good. They don't necessarily care too much about the nitty-gritty details. They want to make sure that they're enjoying their exercise. They want to be social. They want to hang out with their friends when they do it. And that's, you know, things like team sports, again, are going to be quite good for them. So they're going to be less inclined towards the intellectual side of things, but more the feeling of how exercise is. And again, we mentioned the muscle types before are going to be quite competitive, and they'll use, you know, want to be physically competitive, but also intellectually competitive. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks, Steve. And we've got some great comments coming through. Zena here says, yeah, amazing. A few years ago, I had a personal trainer, and the exercise he recommended for me didn't seem so personal. Haha. And this it's quite a new concept and a new paradigm, Zena. And this is really the exciting start of a lot of new information, new education that's coming out. And so we're really excited to be able to share this. This is our inaugural summit. This is the first ever personalised health summit in the world. And we're really excited to be able to bring this information to you, and we'll be doing these very, very regularly so that we can make sure that everybody gets this information as needed. And there's a lot of a long ways to go for this information to disseminate down through all different professions and government levels, and many, many big conversations in science and medicine curriculum. And it's a big conversation. And so we appreciate your perspective and a lot of other perspectives that will be changing and transitioning over time. A bit like, 10 years ago, we thought that fats in the diet were really bad and everything had to be low fat. Now we realise that there's a little bit more to that, and we actually want to get our fats back in our diets. So there's a lot of things that change as we have more knowledge, and the concept and the understanding about personalised health is one of those things that we're all very different. We all need different things that, as Steve said, the 30 to 60 minutes of exercise each day isn't appropriate for everybody at their different stages in life. It needs to be a lot more personalised than that. And so thank you for your comments and questions, Steve. We've got the last question here. Let me see what we want to jump to. We've got so interesting. How can gyms start to incorporate this? Group exercise classes are so popular, and I wonder how these classes can appeal to all the different types of people that we are. Have you got any insights there, Steve?
That's a very good question. From a personal standpoint, I think a lot of people actually self-select this stuff without them actually consciously understanding it. You'll find that people will naturally go towards a high pump class, high intensity type training if they're a particular body type, whereas others may go towards a lower impact class or a hydrotherapy class or something like that. There's an element there of self-selection, but there are most certainly there's some interesting stuff happening in the backgrounds with a lot of this stuff at the moment. And to be able to personalize this, for example, each individual exercise program, obviously you would need to be in touch with a personal trainer. And don't get me wrong, there are some great personal trainers, particularly some of the staff that we have here. We've been able to do a lot of education with our personal trainers to make sure that they're aware that everyone is different. Often you'll find that's a very classic example is that I went and saw a personal trainer. They saw their client and they did the same exercises. Then they saw the next client and did the exact same exercises. They saw the next client, they did the exact same exercises. So in terms of group classes, I would imagine that people naturally self-select. So go and do whatever feels good. Go and make sure you're getting out and off the couch and doing something at least anyway. So don't feel too bad. Something's better than nothing.
Thanks for sharing that, Steve. And that really is an important concept to be aware of. This conversation has been very specific, very personalised, very high in content, and to Australian people talking quite quickly as well. For those that aren't from Australia, you've done very well to follow through on this conversation, and really important to understand that moving is the best start. Personalised movement is the secondary conversation. There's going to be a much bigger conversation moving forward, but just getting out there and doing something, just moving your body, whether it's sitting at home, breathing exercises, Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates, walking, going out playing in the garden, or doing actually gardening, going for walks in the forest, going for hikes, doing strength training, doing high intensity training, going for marathons and triathletes and adventure races. There's so many different things out there, and it's about finding out what's right for you at this point in time for you guys listening in right now. So, Steve, we're going to wrap up this call fairly soon, but one last question. I like to talk about the future. What do you see as the future of personalised health? What do you see? Where do you see this going? And what are some things maybe even happening in Australia right now that you're involved in that we can be aware of what's coming?
It's a very good question. I think the way in which we approach people in general will be very much more specific. Obviously, we want to understand who they are as a whole person. I think I mentioned that at the top that I try to do that now, but advances in that will be leapfrogging. We'll go further and further very, very quickly, and to be able to fully understand the person that's sitting in front of me and how I can have a tangible effect on that person's life. I think moving forward, some of the things like, I know that we have the PH360 has some health retreats, which I think are a fantastic initiative, going away. And as someone who's been on one, have a look at them. They're absolutely fantastic. Going away, getting everything personalized for you, your own food, your own exercise, those kinds of things would be absolutely phenomenal. And I think eventually, in essence, you're trying to live that. You're trying to live you're trying to live in a state or using your epigenetics that are very personalized for you to give you that optimal health. And I think if we can all try and approach that, or that could be our goal, I think we'll have a lot of advancements in terms of some of the dysfunctions, the health dysfunctions that we're currently seeing.
Awesome, Steve. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight there with us in many, many different capacities. We're just putting a few links up there for those that are interested in finding more out about Steve. EliteBodyManagement.com is where you can find out more about Steve and book a session. Steve, you take live sessions for what you do in Brisbane in Australia. So if anyone's near there, please go and take advantage of checking Steve out. Steve also does virtual sessions, I believe, with PH360 for any coaching. So wherever you are in the world, we just had some great comments coming through. Particularly last one from Thomas saying, I'd love to find a trainer like Steve here in Milwaukee. Engage with Steve virtually, who can do some sessions live like this. So if you want to find out more about that, you can email support@ph60.me or check Steve out at elitebodymanagement.com to find out the amazing things he's doing. I hope from the conversation tonight, you've got an understanding about what's in Steve's head, what's in his mind, the huge amount of information that's there and how he's applying that to people's lives, and teaching a lot of other trainers and other health professionals how to do this themselves so they can help a lot more people out there. So, Steve, thank you so much for giving us an insight from a clinician's perspective and even from an elite sports perspective as to how we look at the personalisation of health, and then for bringing that back to everybody just sitting at home in the comfort of their own home right now listening into this, whether we're an elderly population, whether we're active, whether we're not so active. Thank you so much for bringing that transition, that transparency across all the different genres to us tonight. So I really appreciate your insights in personalised health. I really appreciate you sharing a bit more about PH360 and how we can find out a lot more about that, and people can really use that right now from the comfort of their own home to harness the information about what's right for them to be happy and healthy, which is the whole intention of this summit. So a huge thank you to PH360 Me for sponsoring this summit series. A huge thank you to Steve for being here, and the biggest thank you to you for dialing in and for listening in and investing this time into your own health and your own happiness so that you can find out exactly what's right for you and take all this amazing information that people are delivering here to better help you on your journey towards the state of health. So thank you for being here. Please go ahead and like the Facebook page so you can find out all the latest and greatest from the speakers, from the bonuses and gifts and schedules. And please subscribe to the YouTube channel, as we said before. That's where you get free access to all the replays from all the speakers. This information is free. It's here for you. We're here to share it with you. Please share this with your family and friends and community so that everybody can benefit in the same way that you are. Thank you so much, Steve. Once again, thank you, and thank you for all being here. Look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks, Matt. Cheers. Appreciate it.
Thanks.